Hello, all benders and non-benders, and welcome back to Avatar Generations. Today we are going to be discussing the newest powerful opponent character that has been added to the game, and the third Kyoshi timeline 5-star character. This is, and I'm only going to try this once or twice here, Taliriktug. Taliriktug. He is a Fifth Nation pirate from the Kyoshi timeline and a defensive waterbender. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he's our first 5-star defensive waterbender, unless I'm forgetting somebody, which is technically possible. But if I'm correct, he's our very first 5-star defensive waterbender, and we're going to talk about why that could be very important in the very near future. But we're going to talk about his abilities here. His basic here is Hailstorm Hook. Deals resilient damage to one enemy. Just a reminder, resilient damage means it is based on his defensive stat. We've been getting a lot of that lately. And then deals waterbending damage to all enemies. That's based on the caster's defense if his covering stance is active. So basically, normally it's just a resilient strike. Very simple. But if he's in his covering stance, which we'll get to in a second, he will deal waterbending damage to all enemies, which will inflict the water debuff on them, and it will still scale on his defense. So he is a defensive scaling character as far as his damage goes. It's been a very popular typing lately, and I think that will certainly help him out with this as well as we talk about the rest of his kit. Now, his advance is very interesting. It doesn't do damage, it's more of a passive ability. It decreases the rank of all elemental debuffs on all allies by 1, first of all. So, if you have an ally that has, like, let's say a rank 3 fire debuff, it will turn it into a much less dangerous rank 2 fire debuff. And so on and so forth with all the other elemental debuffs. Gains increased crit chance for 1 turn, and then enters a covering stance for 1 turn. Now, this one is very interesting. Increases the crit damage that he deals by 35%, and then he takes 35% reduced damage from critical hits. So basically, if he gets crit, he's not going to take as much damage, really kind of playing into him being more tanky. And then this stance is removed if he does receive a crushing hit. Remember, a crushing hit has a chance of proccing, and it'll show up as like gold numbers and does a little more damage than your average hit. So kind of important to keep in mind there. And then remember, covering stance plays into Hailstorm Hook here, where it turns his basic into water bending damage. So very interesting stuff there. And then we're going to talk about his passive. Remove all water element from himself, so if he's inflicted with the water element, he shakes it off, with a 35% chance to inflict the water element on attacking enemies for 2 turns whenever you receive a critical hit. So, if he gets crit, then if he has a water element, he'll remove it, and then he can actually inflict the water element on the person who crit him, basically almost like a counter debuff effect. And then speaking of counterattacks, has a 35% chance to attack the enemy that just attacked him if covering stance is active. And then on skill ups, those chances do go up by a little bit. So basically, he can cleanse himself of water debuffs, not bad, inflict the water element debuff himself, and then counter if he's in that covering stance. Very cool stuff there. And then he does have some skill masteries on his passive here. Mastery level 2 permanently increases his defense by 10% whenever he is healed. I don't believe he handles that himself before level 2, but if you see here at level 3, he does. But basically, this will not only increase his bulk, but also increase the damage of his basic. Very important to keep in mind. Mastery level 3, heal for 25% of your max HP whenever entering the covering stance. So basically, whenever he uses this, he will also heal himself, which plays into this level 2 effect. And then at Mastery level 4, he has a 25% chance to enter covering stance for 2 turns, not just 1, but 2 actually, whenever he receives a critical hit. This procs once per turn, which does make sense because you really wouldn't need it to proc more than once because it lasts for 2 turns anyway. So if you are able to get him through some arena battles, you do get that chance to get his stance without even needing his advance, which is not bad because looking at his skill ups here, now keep in mind, he's a powerful opponent. So he is naturally cheaper. If you wanted to power him up, you absolutely can on a pretty easy budget. But I really don't see a huge amount of incentive to power him up. It would increase the effect chances of this by a little bit, and then if you get to level 3, you get another turn of covering stance. But I think the Mastery level 4, in my opinion, and keep in mind this is opinion, I think this kind of circumvents the need for skill ups just a little bit, because you can get that chance to get that covering stance for 2 turns anyway. And by the time this expires, you'll probably be able to use this again. Just kind of a thought there, so maybe if you were thinking about powering him up or not, maybe save on your nature stones and your powerful opponent tickets, because I really don't feel like he needs it. That's just, now that is personal opinion, of course, and I could be wrong, but it's also worth mentioning that his signature relic is also only a 4-star, so while you would get it maxed out if you went that far, you're still not going to get as much use out of a 4-star relic stat-wise as you would a 5-star relic. Now, it is a very interesting relic, and we'll talk about that in a second, but all that to say, I'm not sure I can recommend burning your hard-earned powerful opponent tickets or your nature stones on this character. But that said, that is not to call him bad at all. I can't say I've done a huge amount of testing, but he absolutely has some roles that he can play. But for now, we're going to talk about some recommendations on his arts and other items. So honestly, I think his one best bet is going to be just the basic defense set, the Unity set here. Honestly, because, I mean, his defense. His basic 100% is defensive oriented. I mean, it scales on attack and defense, but it's primarily going to be defense you're going to want to think about. And this allows him to also be a very tanky character. The fact that crits won't be as effective on him, plus having a really good defensive art set, will play very well with him. Now, as far as substats go, whether you want to talk about accuracy or resistance, keep in mind he does throw around quite a few water elements, so you definitely want to have, if I were to spit out a number, I'd say you want at least half of his arts with the accuracy substat, and then the other half with the resistance substat if you can help it. But it wouldn't be the worst idea in history for him to get some resistance as well, just to give him that bulk against other debuffs. But his advanced can cleanse elemental debuffs, at least reduce their rank a little bit. So that's something to keep in mind, where he doesn't have to be quite as scared of that. But if you can, kind of half and half's probably the good one to go for with accuracy and resistance. And then if you do get a couple extra accuracy arts that you can use, might not be the worst idea. Fortunately, if we take a look at his supports here, being a waterbender, he does have some very good options. The Snow Leopard Caribou is fantastic and very easy to get, as you do get a few of these from the rank ups. In fact, you might even see here that I've got just 2 sitting here, because why not? It increases speed by 20% when it's maxed out. If you do want to run a waterbender team, the Snow Leopard Caribou is simply fantastic. Also, kind of going back to that accuracy conversation, the Koala Otter is not bad either, as it does have a very healthy accuracy buff for water element heroes. So, good to keep in mind. Definitely good to keep in mind. He's got quite a few good options. You also do have the Knowledge Seeker here, which is kind of like the Koala Otter, except just strictly defensive heroes. The Koala Otter's probably going to get a little more use, though, compared to the Knowledge Seeker, because that way you can run waterbenders like Bending Master Katara or Kiwak, and their accuracy will be increased as well. Something to keep in mind there, some food for thought. Now, relics. He's got a lot of interesting options here. First of all, we are going to talk about his relic, Call to Freedom. This drops at the same time as him, like with all powerful opponents. If you get to that 10th pull, you will get a copy of him and a copy of the relic at the same time. Nice little 2-for-1 deal there. It's only usable on 5th Nation pirate fleet characters, kind of keep that in mind. And then his passive is Call to Freedom. Permanently reduce the advanced skill cooldown of the caster by 1 turn, so it will just reduce it by 1. And then increases the turn bar by 10%, which would increase on skill ups when the caster is part of a combo once per turn during the first 3 turns of battle. Interesting stuff here. First of all, the reduced advanced skill cooldown, you can't go wrong there. That's pretty dang good. And then increasing the turn bar by a little bit, it's like, it's got some pseudo speed there with that turn bar, where basically in the first chunk of the battle, if this character is being used in combos, they're getting a lot more speed. Funny enough, mostly because of the competition this relic has, I'm not so sure this is great for him, but it might be great for the future character Pirate Queen Tegaka. I'm so bad with names, I apologize. But I'm saying that it could be useful for her, because of course she's 5th Nation, I mean she's the Pirate Queen for Pete's sake. And then being able to use her advanced skill more, and then get a little more speed as she is much more offensively oriented, might be something to keep in mind. But again, being that it is a 4-star relic, I can't in good conscience recommend going after this specifically, just because you're never going to get as many stats out of it as you would a 5-star relic. Back during Captain Bo Quinn, when that Games of War set was out, a very powerful 5-star set, yeah, that one's nice. That one was really nice. So, but that's more subject to hefty opinion. Also, he has got some competition. The Ice Totem here is very good for inflicting water elements. 60% chance to inflict the water element on a random enemy for 1 turn at the start of your battle. This happens up to 6 times in battle. Not bad at all. And then, of course, how could we talk about him without talking about the very popular defensive sets? You got, of course, the Masks of Ursa, the ever-popular Statue of Kyoshi. I don't think 4 Nation Tiles really applies because he doesn't get a whole lot of buffs to himself. But the masks and the statue of Kyoshi is absolutely something to keep in mind. You might also go to kind of think about the Blade of Tegaka here. I wouldn't recommend it for him, and I'll tell you why. The passive effect here permanently increases speed to crit rate by 11% when you inflict a negative state. He doesn't really inflict negative states. That's not his thing. He's meant to be bulky and inflict some water elements every now and then. So, with the exception of this being a very good stat stick, this is one of the 5-star relics that did come from the powerful opponent banners. Aside from being a good stat stick, this really doesn't work for him. So you're really going to want to stick with your typical defensive sets here, or perhaps the Ice Totem if you're really wanting to inflict those water debuffs. So yeah, it sounds like I'm saying he's not a good character when I say things like, oh, you really don't want to get skill ups, or you don't want to summon on his relic. It's not that he's a bad character, but he does have very specific roles. That role is not Arena. You want to know where this guy would be fantastic? The Inagi. If the Inagi is giving you trouble, having a defensive waterbender that scales on defense and can inflict some debuffs and even cleanse his allies of some ranks of the debuffs, yeah, that is where this dude could really, really shine. I can't say I've necessarily tested it, because I just haven't had the chance to actually level him up a huge amount and test him out like that, but I strongly believe against the Inagi, this dude would put in some work. And of course, keep in mind too, while this will be mitigated in the future, he is also one of our only Kyoshi timeline characters at the moment, which for the time being does grant him a bit of intrinsic value there, just on the lack of variety we have at the moment. I have no doubt that's going to change very quickly, but for the time being, he is an excellent budget pick for somebody needing another waterbender, another Kyoshi timeline character, or just someone who's collecting characters kind of like me. So yeah, hope y'all have found this video useful. This guy is the first of hopefully many characters we'll be getting. Judging by a couple of the little teasers they give us, I think the Pirate Queen is coming up next. So we'll have a very cool waterbender very, very soon. But until then, we shall see you next time. Have a good one.